All right, everybody. Welcome back. This is yet another class. We're already finished with Essay 1 first draft. I want to reiterate this is a first draft, and I have received essays from almost everyone, and I mean almost. I'm missing maybe 2 or 3 essays tops. So good turnout. I did happily receive them. I'm in the process right now of going through them just to explain briefly. You'll obviously see when you get them back. I'm going to go through and I'm going to make fairly detailed comments. I'm going to give you suggestions, and they are suggestions. You don't have to abide by them. You are the author at the end of the day. You know, just with any other writing situation, an editor tells an author, I would think you should change this or perhaps add more here. It's up to the author ultimately. So whatever your final product, if you choose to do a revision, again, revisions are not required, but if you do choose to make a revision and submit it, how you revise is ultimately up to you. You are the author. So what I will give you merely is advice. Um, and you will see it on the essays. I will send them back to you. I'm going to email them to you. I'm not going to send them back to you through, if you did submit your essay through D2L, which is fine. I'm not telling you not to do that. That's perfectly fine. I received them probably, I'd say maybe not an equal number, but it was pretty close how many I received through email versus direct submissions through D2L. Either way is fine. I get them the same. They're in the same format. I open them the same. They're exactly the same. So however you wish to get them to me is up to you. However, when I send them back, this is important. This is the important part. When I send them back to you, I will be sending them directly to your GGC email. Okay. I know I've had not very many, but maybe a couple, 3, 4 tops maybe, who are sending me stuff through Gmail and things like that. Don't do that. I'm not supposed to even open those, and if I'm doing it on my home computer, I'm not going to. I don't take any chances with my home computer. But I will be sending them back to you through your GGC email. So you will receive them as attachments. Um, and they will have the comments over in the right margin. There'll be the little dialog boxes. You click on those, it'll highlight what I'm referring to in your essay, and it will give you my advice, you know, and some of it will be compliments. You know, it's not all going to be criticism. If I think you're doing something great, you might see a comment, go, oh, look, why are there so many little boxes? And you might click on one, and it'll say, hey, this is awesome, way to go, great description. That I give encouragement too, because it makes me feel good, and I love to read, and I love to read good stuff. So if you're doing a bang up job, I will praise you and let you know. And if I do have some criticism, that's I try to be as polite about it as possible and explain where, if there's confusion, for example, I might just say, this is unclear, meaning that I just don't understand it. I don't understand what it's referring to, or the phrasing, perhaps. So read the comments carefully, take them into consideration when you're doing your revision, if you choose to do a revision. And then you will have you will have 1 week. So for instance, for the Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes, I will have your first drafts with comments and a grade at the bottom back to you no later than Friday. If you get them back this Friday, you have until the following Friday to submit a revision if you choose to. Now for the Tuesday, Thursday class, you all will be receiving your essays, your drafts back on Thursday. Again, if you choose to do a revision, you must revise and have it back to me no later than the following Thursday. When you send the revisions back, I don't need the original. I already have the original with my comments, so I can compare your original draft, your first draft, with your revision. All you have to send me back is the revision, which I guess is an advantage of doing these through email, because in the past when we were face-to-face classes, I would handwrite all my comments. And plus, that's another advantage. You don't have to read my handwriting or try to. But I would give those back, and then the following week, the student would have to bring that original draft with my comments as well as with the revision, and they had to print them out. So I guess we have a couple advantages with doing it this way. Y'all don't have to print anything out, which saves you money, saves you ink, saves you time, and you don't have to resend your first draft with the revisions. I've already got it. So that's how that's going to work. And of course, y'all know by now that if you have any questions or anything, you can email me, you can call me, you can text me. I would say if it requires more, call me. Several of you have called me and texted me, and I don't mind. No, it's not because it's part of my job. I just honestly don't mind. So if you do need to actually discuss something in real time, call me. I'll talk to you about it. So that's how the revision process is going to work. And again, I will have those back to you Tuesday, Thursday classes. You will get your first drafts back by Thursday, and Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes, you will have them back no later than Friday. Okay, so that means you have 1 week after that to get them, to send them back to me if you choose to do a revision. And after this week, or actually after today, we're basically going to be finished with the personal experience or talking about it in any type of detail. And I will, not tonight, not on this or today, I'm not going to be discussing the next essay, but we will start on the next video this week discussing essay 2. I know y'all are like, well, we just finished the first one. Well, that's kind of, once that ball gets rolling in this class, it keeps going. So generally every 3 to 4 weeks, you're going to have another essay that that you'll be working on and submitting. And that's basically how it's going to work. So I've already started looking through some of the drafts. Obviously, I'm not finished with them, but I kind of just make mental notes of patterns that I see that we as a class need to work on. And it's been the same for since I started doing this a long time ago, and I really don't see it changing. Oh, and if you guys hear thunder, well, you're not going to hear lightning, but if you hear thunder and rain, it's because there's a very heavy storm going on right now. So, which is kind of cool. I don't mind it if I'm inside. So if you hear any weird booms or anything, it's just the storm going on. Now over here, as you can see, I've got my Microsoft Word open. I am using a rather large font to make this easier. This is just for illustrative purposes. I'm going to try to do this in increments as I see necessary. I'm not going to go over stuff that I don't see y'all needing to that was a good one, any remediation with. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about tonight is the one that's always an issue, and that is commas after opening phrases. These are necessary, and I'm going to go over some pretty straightforward, or what I think are pretty straightforward examples to illustrate how to do it, but not only how, why. You know, I've said this before, personally, I do not like when somebody explains how to do something to me, and I say, well, why do you do it like that? And they just say, well, just because. Well, that's the way it's done. To me, that's not sufficient. I'm the type of person where I want to know why I'm doing something. Okay? Now, for most of my life, you know, that's been the way that I learn. If someone can tell me why I'm doing something, as also how to do it, but also why to do it that way, that clicks with me. That makes more sense. And I said for most of my life. Now I can tell y'all from very personal experience, and any of you who've ever been in any branch of the military know this. In basic training, you don't ask why. If they say do it, if they say how, this is how you do it that way. You do not ask why. Or you will ask why once, and you won't ever ask it again. But that's not how this works. I want to explain why we're doing this. Okay, so the first thing is opening phrases. Now, generally, these are going to be what are known as prepositional phrases. And whether you know the technical terminology or not, that's not, at this juncture, that's really not that important. What's important is for you to recognize. And English, written English in its structure is more, again, it's different from at least the other languages that I've studied even a little bit, is that the structure is not as rigid. Um, in certain cases, you know, especially with commas, they become optional. Uh, I try to follow as close to the so-called rules as I can, but there are cases where it becomes optional. However, with opening phrases, they are necessary because they do serve a purpose, and it's not just a purpose on the written page, it's also serving a purpose if we were speaking. Um, so basically, a prepositional phrase, and this is one of the few rules. In fact, as far as me doing all of my years of study and digging and research, this is really the only rule that I know of that can never be broken. I don't care how experimental you're being. I don't care if you're like James Joyce and Finnegan's Wake or whatever. I don't care who you are, how much of a lyrical poet, genius, writer you are. This rule, this one rule I'm about to share with you can never be broken. And that is what are called prepositional phrases. Okay, so prepositional phrases. And I know I'm not the fastest typer in the world, and I type all the time, so you'd think I'd get better at it. Okay, so I want you all to read that. Prepositional phrases can never contain the subject of a sentence. That is the one rule that the greatest, most phenomenal genius in the history of the written word of English can never break. That rule cannot be broken. Almost every other rule can be bent, can be modified, can be flat out broken for purpose, for emphasis, for poetic license. This one can't. Nobody can. I've never met a person, no matter how great, that can break this rule. So what is a prepositional phrase? Well, it is a phrase that contains a preposition. Now, prepositions can also are just words that indicate relationships between nouns and pronouns and other parts of the sentence. But just because a word can be used as a preposition does not mean that it's always and only a preposition. Certain conjunctions can also be used as prepositions, like the word for. For can be a preposition. For can be a conjunction. I'm going to give you an example here of a prepositional phrase. Okay, so I'll use for. That's a prepositional phrase for the past 2 years. Okay, now if I put a period there, read that by itself. Nothing else. You have no context, you have nothing else, just that phrase. For the past 2 years. Does that make any sense to you? No, it doesn't. And why doesn't it make sense to you? Because there is no subject. In order for a sentence to be complete, and more importantly, for it to make sense, it has to have a subject. For the past 2 years by itself makes no sense. I mean, think about it. Think about if like one of your buddies or a family member, a person, a stranger, just walked up to you in the hallway or the street and said, "For the past 2 years," and they just go silent. You'd be like, "Yeah, come on, spit it out." So that is what is known as a dependent clause. It is dependent on something else. It needs more. So think about prepositional phrases like children, like small children. Small children are dependent on other people, adults, or someone else for their survival. You know, a 18-month-old baby cannot survive on its own. It is a dependent, and not just in a legal sense. I'm talking literally. Okay, I'm not talking about the law and defects or any of that junk. I'm talking real life. A 16, 12-month-old baby, whatever, is a dependent. So that's how a dependent clause works. It is dependent on something else. So we know that this, for the past 2 years, is a DC. It is a dependent clause. Now, if I go down here and I say, that's an independent clause. That would be an IC, because that is a complete sentence. It's not a good one, but it is. I'll say I have been collecting comic books. That's a complete sentence. It has everything that it needs. It has a subject, because I'm the one doing the collecting, right? So I'm the subject. Have been, those are linking verbs. That's what I've been doing. Collecting is a verb gerund form with an ing on it, because that's an action. Collecting is actually doing something. Have been is a linking verb phrase. And what have I been collecting? Comic books. So I'm the subject, have been collecting, that's the verb phrase. Comic books would be the direct object. Okay, so that's a complete sentence. That is an independent clause. This, for the past 2 years, is a dependent clause. So if I combine them into one sentence, and dependent clauses always have to be joined to an independent clause. They can't survive on their own. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring this back, and I'm going to put my comma and my space, and then I also need to put my period, unless I'm super excited, if I'm totally jazzed about it. Look what I'm doing. I'm kidding. Oh, and by the way, unless you're using dialogue where, people are actually speaking, which you were, obviously going to be using in your personal experience. Unless you're using dialogue in college essays, I would say try your hardest not to use exclamation points. They're just not a good thing to use in a college essay unless someone is actually exclaiming something, which would be dialogue in quotes. Just try to stay away from those. I'm not forbidding it. I'm just saying try to. Don't go crazy with them. In fact, unless you just can absolutely not stop yourself. I must do it. Just stay away from it. So here we have a complete sentence with a dependent clause, which is right here. For the past 2 years, that is a dependent clause. Can't stand on its own. Now we have an independent clause. I have been collecting comic books. That's a complete sentence. Since the prepositional phrase is at the beginning, for the past 2 years, comma, I have been collecting comic books. We put the comma there. Now, it's not just arbitrary, because this is a case where the comma is actually reflecting a natural speech cadence. And you can test it on yourself, you know, say it in real time as you would actually say it. Now, I know some people speak faster than others. I know people who, in their speech, when they're talking, the comma doesn't exist. They sound like the punctuation doesn't exist. They start one word and then 1,000 follow it. And unless they just have to take a breath, that's the only time they pause. But in a natural speaking cadence or rhythm, most people would pause here. For the past 2 years, I've been collecting comic books. There's a natural pause there. So in the written form, even though it's required, it also represents a natural pause, which is what commas can also do. It's not the only thing they can do, but it's part of what they can do. So if this is an opening phrase, it's an opening prepositional phrase because it begins with for. Therefore, we have to have the comma there. Now, what's crazy is if you begin a sentence with a dependent clause, you always have to put the comma there. However, if you end the sentence with an independent clause, you don't put the comma. So I'm just going to shorten it. It's the same sentence, pretty much. I mean, close enough. It has the same intention, the same meaning. It's even being used in the same, as far as we know, the same context, because we really don't have much context or any context. But this is the same sentence, just phrased differently. Notice one has a comma, the other doesn't. That's because the dependent clause for the past 2 years is at the end of the sentence. If you begin the sentence with it, you have to put the comma. If you end the sentence with it, you do not put the comma. Now, again, this is opening phrases with commas represent a natural pause. For the past 2 years, I've been collecting comic books. There's a natural pause there. However, if we reverse it and put the dependent clause at the end, for most people in their natural speaking cadence or rhythm, there is no pause. I've been collecting comic books for the past 2 years. That's the natural way that most people would say it. That's how I would say it. That's how most of you would probably say it. So therefore, we don't put the comma. So with opening phrases, particularly prepositional phrases, remember, you must have that comma. And this is very important. A prepositional phrase always, 100% of the time, has to be connected to an independent clause. It will always be a fragment if it's not. Always. Okay, so let's look at another example here. In my early teens. Again, that makes no sense. There is no subject. That makes no sense. If you say that to another person, they're going to look at you like, keep going. You okay? Need some water? Well, spit it out. Come on, come on. In my early teens. Now, if you're trying to, I want a big disclaimer, okay? We are not writing poetry in this class. If it were a creative writing class or a poetry class, I would love for y'all to write some. In poetry, the rules are kind of whatever you want them to be. That doesn't mean you can just write a bunch of garbage. That's, I guess, subjective or but, objective, I should say. Because of the structure with the stanzas and the lines and all, poems are a completely different animal. We're not included in any of this. But I mean, could this work for a title for your essay? If this was your If this was your personal experience essay, could you title it this and be cool? Would this be okay? Yes. Titles can be fragments. Titles can be one word. But if we're using this as an actual sentence, this doesn't work. There's no subject. There has to be something. In my early teens. Very simple, but now we have a complete sentence. We have, even though this is longer, now don't think, that's another thing I want to touch on. I'm glad I just made this up because it reminded me of something. Okay, in my early teens, that's 4 words, right? In my early teens, that's 4 words. I played baseball, that's 3 words. This is a fragment. Even though it's more words, it's a fragment. This is a complete sentence, even though it's only 3 words. Why is this a fragment over here? Because it has no subject. What's the subject? My is not the subject. Teens isn't the subject. Early obviously isn't the subject. In, preposition, it's not a subject. Here, if we look at this one, I played baseball. Okay, what's the subject? I is the subject. Because remember, the subject is the thing, person, place, thing, idea. Ideas can be subjects. Person, place, thing, idea of the sentence that is committing the action, the verb. So what did I do? Played, that's the verb. And what did I play? Baseball. Baseball is the direct object of what I did, of the verb. So I played baseball has subject, verb, object. That's a complete sentence. That's all you need. Here, we don't have a subject. So we don't have a sentence. So in my early teens, I played baseball. Now again, if we reverse it, we're not going to use a comma because we make a natural pause the way it's written here in the first example. In my early teens, I played baseball. There's a natural pause there. No pause. That one just flows. It just keeps going. There's no I played baseball in my early teens. So prepositional phrase at the beginning of the sentence, comma, always. Prepositional phrase at the end of the sentence, no comma. You don't need it there. Now, if you have a phrase in the middle of a sentence, it will have comma before it and a comma after it. So, and these are actually, these are called appositives. But again, you guys don't need to worry about the technical terms. You just need to learn how to recognize patterns. English grammar is a series of patterns. It's pattern recognition. Like if any of you are musicians and you can actually read music, if you can read sheet music. Sheet music is a series of patterns. You recognize those patterns and you know what to do with your instrument. If any of you are into programming, if you all the way down to code, if you're into coding, then you know that that's a series of I's and O's. Basically, is what basic code is, binary. So a bunch of the I, O, all those different little, that's all just 2 letters basically, but each of those 2 letters in a certain pattern represents a completely different thing. So that's one way to look at written English, is it's pattern recognition. Whether or not you can explain it in the technical terms and say because of this, this, and this, unless you're going to do what I do and become like an English teacher, then that's not what's ultimately the most important thing. The most important thing is to recognize the pattern and say, yes, this is a prepositional phrase. I recognize that pattern. I know I need a comma here. If you can articulate that to someone else, then that's great. If you can't, you just know that that's how it's supposed to be because you recognize the pattern, that's good too. Now, if you're a teacher and an English teacher and you can't articulate the whys, then that's a problem. But just for your purposes as writers in general, recognize the pattern. So I played baseball in my early teens. It flows. It's straight there, no comma. In my early teens, I played baseball. You have a pause. Therefore, you need the comma. So if we put in a positive form, which is in the middle of a sentence, or interrupts, if you will, then there's a comma on both sides of it. And generally, this is just additional information that explains the context of the sentence more. So if I said, Sally my next door neighbor. Okay, that's not a complete sentence, but that's just what I'm going to start with. So Sally, my next door neighbor, and I don't know Sally, I don't have a next door neighbor, so I'm not wishing like bad things to happen to some person named Sally. This is just what came out of my head. Okay, so here's an example where you have a phrase in the middle of a sentence or within a sentence. It's not directly in the middle, but you have a phrase that's called in a positive within the sentence that just gives more specific additional information because the writer, me as the writer, I feel this is necessary to give a broader context, more detail, and specific information to the sentence. But it is not needed for this to be a complete sentence. Just like in my early teens is not needed for this to be a complete sentence. I played baseball. I played baseball as a complete sentence. It doesn't need this. This is additional information. However, in my early teens, needs I played baseball in order to be a complete sentence. So if we read this as it is, Sally, my next door neighbor, had a tree fall on her house last night. That gives more specific detail and more information of who Sally is and why it would be relevant to me that she's my next door neighbor. I obviously have more connection to this person through that. If Sally is someone that I've never met, I have no idea who Sally is. Sally lives in Ontario, Canada, and somebody says Sally had a tree fall on her house last night. To me, in Georgia, Grayson, Georgia, I'm going to say, well, who's Sally? And I'm sorry that a tree fell on her house, but what does that have to do with me? So for context and clarity, you can use these appositive phrases within your sentence. However, they have to be offset. So again, let's read the highlighted portion without the rest of the sentence. My next door neighbor. Doesn't make any sense. There's no subject, there's no context, there's nothing, no reference. It makes no sense on its own. However, if we read this part of the sentence without my next door neighbor, it still makes perfect sense. It's just not as detailed or specific. Sally had a tree fall on her house last night. That's a complete sentence. That stands alone. This, my next door neighbor, is a dependent clause. It cannot survive on its own. It needs Sally had a tree fall on her house last night to mean anything to anyone. All right, so these are the two most common instances of how I've seen so far in the essays that I've read so far. These are the two most common ways that that commas are not being used at all or correctly. They're being put in the wrong place. So remember, prepositional phrase can never contain the subject. A prepositional phrase on its own will make no sense. Unless, it's like an inside joke or something, then of course we all do that, right? Have a little thing we'll say to somebody who gets it in front of a whole group of people and he'll be like, yeah, and everybody else is like, what? We don't do inside jokes in our essays, okay? They're not for people who are only in the know. We're writing to a wide audience of relatively educated adults, relatively well-educated adults. Okay, so for the purpose, we do need to use these complete sentences. So recap, and then that's going to be it for today. If the prepositional phrase or just the opening phrase of the sentence is used, it must have a comma after it. For the past 2 years, I've been collecting comic books. It has to be there. If it's at the end of the sentence, there is no comma. I've been collecting comic books for the past 2 years. If you have a phrase and within the sentence, it must be surrounded by commas. Sally, my next door neighbor, had a tree fall on her house last night. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop there for tonight. And next time I'm going to cover coordinating conjunctions, because a lot of prepositions are also coordinating conjunctions. And coordinating conjunctions also need commas, but it's a different reason and a different way to do it. So I'm going to try to keep focus on this for right now. And next time we will be going over using commas for coordinating conjunctions. And I'm going to teach you some little acronyms and whatnot. So that's all I'm going to go over for today. And when you get your essays back, remember, this is up to you. If you're happy with whatever grade you get on this first draft, you are done with Essay 1. You are finished. However, if you are going to revise, you have 1 week. So if you get it back this Friday, you have until the following Friday to get it to me. Revisions are not indefinite. You can't give me a revision for Essay 1 4 weeks from now. Well, you can, but I'm not going to grade it. So revisions, you have 1 week from the day I give it back to get it back to me. And that's only if you choose to. If you get an A on your essay, don't do a revision because it can't get any higher. However, what I would like you to do is still read all of my comments and look at my little, you need a comma here, or this is a missing comma. At least read through the comments and take those to heart, because an A does not mean perfect, because there's literally no such thing as a perfect essay by anyone. I'm not talking about students. I'm talking about any human being in the entirety of the written word. There's no such thing as a perfect essay. Everything can be improved. Everything can be revised. So look the comments over, take them to heart, and try to improve. That's the whole goal here, is to get y'all to improve and to get you ready for college level writing, to get you to the next level, to get you to success in this class, the next class, get your degree, and do on and live your happy life. And that's it. So until next time, y'all take care, and I will see you soon.